So I'm Julia Kavicki. I'm the education director at Rich Earth Institute, and we're a nonprofit based in Brattleboro, Vermont. And I'll be sharing a bit about the big picture of why we're Peecycling and what we do on the community scale, and a few spotlights on projects from around the world. And then I'll get into the details of how to do this in the home garden scale as well. And then we'll have some time for discussion and Q&A at the end. So uh, our mission and vision is all centered around this concept of reconnecting human bodies into the life-sustaining food nutrient cycle. And we do this through education and technological innovation, and I'll share a little bit more about what some of that looks like, and also through research. So we have a bunch of different active research projects going to advance this on a kind of systematic level. So to take a step back and think about what's currently happening in our conventional nutrient landscape, where we call it kind of the flush and forget system, where often we flush the toilet and don't necessarily think about where those nutrients are going. But of course, we know that they go somewhere. And because you're here today, you know that as well. And so with septic and conventional sewer wastewater treatment plant systems, these were designed to remove organic matter and pathogens in our waste. And when functioning properly, they do that pretty well, but they often still release a vast majority of the nutrients in our wastewater into our water bodies, along with other contaminants that can get combined with our waste, especially in centralized wastewater treatment systems where they not only have residential toilet wastes going to them, but also sometimes industrial wastes that get combined all together and bring a lot of new contaminants like PFAS into the mix. So once our nutrients specifically get into those water bodies, they have all kinds of negative ecological effects where they fertilize harmful algal blooms, which can then produce neurotoxins that accumulate in shellfish and also deoxygenate the water, making it unfit for drinking and producing these mass fish kills, and generally just not a great end fate for what's happening from the nutrients in our waste. So we think of this all as part of a linear nutrient flow, where on the one hand, we're using very energy intensive and extractive processes to procure the nutrients for use in agriculture. And on the other hand, we're wasting those nutrients into our water bodies along with a huge amount of clean, potable water. And every step along this linear nutrient flow has damaging environmental and societal impacts. So just to quickly spotlight a few of those, when we look at the fertilizer production side, specifically for nitrogen fertilizer production, it accounts for about 1 to 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions just to produce the nitrogen fertilizer alone. And especially in the last few years, we've been seeing those prices skyrocket as energy prices have been increasing. And there were a lot of headlines about that when Russia was beginning the war in Ukraine, especially, and the energy prices were really high then. And so farmers have been increasingly really looking for alternative nutrient nitrogen sources that are more affordable and also locally available. And so synthetic nitrogen is produced through the Haber-Bosch process, which is basically a very energy intensive way of procuring nitrogen out of the air and making it in a plant available form. And then for phosphorus fertilizer, this is largely available in rock reserves in a few limited geographic locations around the world. And many folks estimate that we're approaching peak phosphorus, where we're running out of the phosphorus that's available for mining, and we're increasingly having those phosphorus resources running off from agricultural land and through our wastewater streams into our water bodies, where they're not able to be really reclaimed for use in agriculture. And there's also some human rights abuses associated with phosphorus mining, especially around one of the largest phosphorus mines in the world is in Morocco, where a lot of the folks who had been living there have been displaced, and there's a lot of labor injustices in terms of how that mining is accomplished. And it actually has the world's largest conveyor belt to move the phosphate rock from Morocco to ports where it can be shipped around the world. And this phosphorus conveyor belt can be seen from space. It's so large. So it's really kind of wild how phosphorus fertilizer is produced. So that's on the nutrient procurement side of things. And then once we use those nutrients to grow our crops and eat and nourish our bodies, and then the excess nutrients come out in our waste, when we flush that small amount of waste in clean, potable water, we're wasting a huge amount of water. And especially with climate change and drought being an increasing problem, this is really not a wise use for our precious water, clean water resources. we've estimated that the US wastes about 900 billion gallons every year of clean water just by flushing urine away alone. And then all of that water and that small amount of waste gets sent to our wastewater treatment systems, which are very overburdened and unprepared to deal with the stresses of climate change. The 2021 report card that an engineering society produced for America's infrastructure gave our wastewater systems a D+ in terms of their ability to even function as designed. So we have a lot of problems with them not doing those things that they were originally designed to do, namely pathogen removal and organic matter removal, especially as heavy flooding events cause combined sewer systems to overflow and release wastewater untreated into our rivers, and also are causing failing septic systems, as we've seen throughout Vermont, where we're located, especially in the past couple of years with some really heavy precipitation events. So all of this comes together to paint a not very great picture of our nutrient landscape. And here at Rich Earth and at many other places around the world, we're working to reconnect the dots of this line into the food nutrient cycle, so that our nutrients can remain locally available in our communities and contained out of our waterways and out of our clean potable water that we need to use. So keeping our waste separate from our water and able to be easily reused and recycled perpetually in our communities. So we've calculated the fact that every day our bodies produce enough fertilizer to grow the wheat required to make one loaf of bread. And I think this is just a really nice way of visualizing the potential for reciprocity between ourselves and the land, where we can give the land in abundance what it needs to grow this amazing amount of wheat, and then the land can return those nutrients to us, and we can continue that relationship in perpetuity. So just a couple graphs to illustrate why we're focused on urine recycling specifically here. This is a visualization of the total volume that makes up what we typically consider to be wastewater. So you can see that human waste makes up this tiny little circle compared to the huge volume of clean tap water that it gets combined with. And you can see that visualization again on this graph on the far left here. But it contains a vast majority of the nutrients in our wastewater, specifically the nitrogen and the phosphorus. Urine contains about 70 to 80% of the nitrogen in our wastewater and 50 to 65% of the phosphorus. So by doing a relatively small act volume-wise of diverting our urine at the source and separating it, or source separation, we can have a relatively large impact on preventing that downstream nutrient pollution, and also on procuring those nutrients and keeping them locally available for our gardens and farms. But you'll see on the far right that it does contain about half of what this graph calls micropollutants, which are really the pharmaceuticals that sometimes come out in our urine. So I'll explain our thinking about this question, because I know it's one that's top of mind for a lot of folks, and it's actually something that we've researched with some university partners. So when we go back to that linear nutrient flow, it's also a linear contaminant flow where our pharmaceuticals, when we flush them, end up in our water bodies and also have a wide range of bizarre ecological effects, including changing fish physiology and behavior and effects that ramify up the food chain. And if you're interested in learning more about this question, there's a lot of really interesting research out there about different drug compounds and the effects on different species that they're having. So that's not a great end fate for the pharmaceuticals that do come out in our urine. So if we think about the nutrient cycle, when we're reclaiming urine for agriculture, it's a good way to protect those aquatic ecosystems that don't really have a buffer or way to degrade those compounds. But of course, this raises new questions about what happens to the fate of those pharmaceuticals in our soil and in our crop tissue. So this is a question that Rich Earth researched in partnership with the University of Michigan, the University at Buffalo, and the Hampton Roads Sanitation District to study the fate of pharmaceuticals in groundwater, soil, and crop tissue. And for this study, they used urine that was spiked with very high levels of a broad range of different pharmaceuticals to understand how different chemical properties work and kind of the worst case scenario of what a community urine supply would be. So essentially what they found is that the chemical compounds are not accumulated in the crop tissue at any significant human health exposure pathway level. You'd have to eat a pound of urine fertilized lettuce every day for 1,000 years to get back the same amount of caffeine that's in 1 cup of coffee. So really, really tiny levels and quite comparable to the background levels that we see, especially for example, if farms are using reclaimed water that comes downstream from a wastewater treatment plant, that water has pharmaceuticals in it that they're applying to farmland. And there have been studies on those contexts that have found very similar results. But we have some reason to believe it might be the soil microbes that are helping to break down these compounds. And so this raises even further questions about the long-term potential soil health impacts of urine fertilization. So we have a new active study that we're doing with Cornell University and the University of Michigan to look at the long-term soil health impacts of urine fertilization. And so that's a 5-year study that we're in the early stages of now, but we'll have more results to share on that soon. There's also a recent study that came out on the a short-term kind of small-scale trial looking into the pharmaceutical fate and soil health impacts of urine fertilization specifically. And they'll be presenting on that at our annual summit that's coming up in November. And I'll share more details about that at the end of this webinar, so you can learn how to learn more about that question if you're interested. So just a quick spotlight on some Peecycling projects from around the world. One of the largest projects we know of is in South Central Niger, where a farmers union did a farmer-to-farmer education project, teaching primarily female farmers how to reclaim their urine to grow more food to feed their families. And one of the interesting things they did in this project was they collaborated with village religious leaders and other leaders in the community to think about how can we make urine recycling a socially acceptable practice. And the idea they came up with was to rename the urine from when it's urine the waste to urine the fertilizer, so that it has a cognitive shift in people's minds and can be socially acceptable to use on your land. And the name they decided to give it is Oga, which in the indigenous Igbo language means the boss. So when you're working with urine fertilizer, you're working with the boss in your garden. Another really big institution of urine recycling has been AWOG, the Swiss Institute of Aquatic Science and Technology. And they've really been researching urine recycling and source separation on an academic level since the early 90s. And as a result of this, have spawned a lot of academic interest and new labs around the world who are working on this, figuring out some of the technical details and life cycle impacts of figuring out how to reconnect that food nutrient cycle. And they've also spawned a startup company called Vuna and Vuna Nexus that designs and installs building scale urine recycling with full treatment packages that live in the basement of large buildings. And they actually produce this fertilizer product called Urine that they have for sale for gardeners to buy in gardening stores. And the sale of Urine provides enough of a profit that it forms a key part of their business model. So that's been really inspiring to see. And Rich Earth Institute, we're a nonprofit, but we also have a startup company called Brightwater Tools that's working on designing additional treatment technologies to create a similar version of this in the United States. And I'll tell you more about that later on. So over in Paris, you may have been hearing some headlines recently about the impact of the negative water quality in the Seine on the Olympics. And Paris has actually been doing a lot of work to clean up their waterways, but of course, heavy rains always come in the way. And they generally have this problem that they describe as the scissor effect, where the population levels in Paris are rising and the river levels in the Seine are lowering due to climate change and other factors. And so the nutrient pollution concentrations are getting higher and higher. And the water agency in Paris actually recognizes the value of urine diversion in protecting their waterways so much that they now subsidize up to 80% of new developments that incorporate urine recycling, which has been really huge. And this funding has allowed several new large-scale projects to be under development and becoming online in Paris recently, including this large entire neighborhood complex that will divert 2 meters cubed of urine per day. And you can watch a video with more details about this project on our summit website. They presented last year. So if you go to our 2023 summit recordings on our summit website, you can learn more about this project. So over in the United States, there's a lot of organizations working on different aspects of completing the food nutrient cycle, from figuring out their regulatory changes to portable toilet companies to compost toilet designers. And so we're really trying to learn how we can work together and collaborate to bring this movement forwards and bring urine recycling and the completed food nutrient cycle to more places across the country. So we're up here in Vermont, the Rich Earth Institute. We've been around since 2012. We started really, these are our founders, Kim Nace and Abe Noe Hayes. And really the project started because there were a lot of people in Brattleboro who were already fertilizing their gardens and collecting way more urine than they could use on their gardens. And there were local farmers who were really interested in completing the food nutrient cycle on their farms and couldn't access enough urine to fertilize their farms at scale. So they started this project to demonstrate how community scale urine recycling could be possible and figure out what research and new tools we needed to bring this to other communities. So now in 2024, we have a lot of research projects and partnerships with institutes across the country and funding from these large federal agencies. So the community scale urine recycling program is really the heart of what we do. We collect about 12,000 gallons of urine every year, which allows us to conserve about 2.3 million gallons of water that would have otherwise been used to flush that urine. And it's really the platform for our research and education. So the backbone of our community program is our urine donors, who are people who sign up as volunteers to contribute their urine through a variety of means that I'll show you. And they do this for some of the core reasons that we do our program as well, which is to conserve water in their homes, to be able to protect their watershed in a really unique way, and also to be able to provide fertilizer to local farms and support local farms in a unique way as well. We have an annual piss-off competition to see who can collect the most urine in a year, and the most prolific urine donors get this golden trophy as a prize. So we like to encourage some friendly competition to keep those numbers high. So there's 4 main steps of our community program that I'll quickly walk us through: collection, transport, treatment, and then farm application. For collection, one of the easiest ways to collect urine, and this also works for home garden scale urine recycling, is our QBN funnel, or this portable urine collection device. We actually have a survey out to help us name what this kit should be called. So I'll send a link to that after the webinar if you'd like to provide feedback on what we should call this thing. But essentially, it's a 2.5 or 5 gallon jug connected to a funnel through some concatenated plumbing parts that are totally watertight. And it has a few nifty features to help prevent odor from forming. And minimizing odor from your urine collection system is also important to help prevent nutrient loss, because when you're smelling that urine-y smell, you're also smelling, what you're smelling is the nitrogen off-gassing. So you want to prevent it for multiple reasons. So one way to minimize odor is to add a small amount of acid to your container before you start collecting. So generally for a 5 gallon container, we recommend adding 1 to 2 cups of white vinegar. And the other thing that these kits have in them is a little ball pit ball, actually a little plastic ball that sits in the center of the funnel that sort of acts as a valve check so that the urine can enter the container, but the gases can't leave. And there's a couple devices folks sometimes use to enable ease of collection with a kit like this. One is the nun's cap, which is just a little sort of toilet hat that can fit on your toilet seat, and you can sit to pee into that and then pour it into your funnel. The other is the Peecycle, or, there's a range of different stand to pee urination devices available on the market, but we've been partnering with Peecycle for a number of years now, and some of our urine donors enjoy using this as a way to stand to pee into a kit like this as well. And then recently we've partnered with Toilets for People, which is a local compost toilet company based in Jamaica, Vermont, to design this pee-only toilet, which is essentially a seated version of this portable urine collector. So for folks who are collecting this way, once their containers are full, you can unscrew the funnel and screw in a cap and bring it to one of our urine depots. We have 2 urine depots. One is in Brattleboro and one's up in Rockingham, Vermont. And those have a self-serve vacuum pump station in them. So you can just bring your full container, bring down the nozzle, and have the urine pumped up and away. So it's a pour-free kind of situation, which is nice for user experience. So all of that urine is then pumped into large storage tanks that keep it there until we're ready to come and pump out the whole depot. So for folks who are ready to upgrade or streamline their urine recycling beyond the portable urine collection, which is really easy to use and a good early entry option, but moving around your urine every couple of weeks is not necessarily for everyone. So we do also offer urine diverting toilet installations. And there's a bunch of different urine diverting toilets on the market. These are the main ones that we work with. Primarily, the Vostman EcoFlush is what we've been installing in local homes and businesses, or a library in town. And essentially, it's a divided bowl toilet where the front half of the toilet diverts to a tank in your basement, and the back half can either go to a composting system or be flushed into your sewer or septic system. And a new toilet that's come on the European market in the past few years has been the Laugh Save, which is exciting because it uses this nifty, they call it the teapot effect, urine trap, where instead of using a divided bowl system, which has some potential for user error, and so there's some concern about having these kinds of divided bowls in public contexts, the Laugh Save is really nice because it uses the physics of how slow-moving liquid flows to trap the urine and then allow the rest of the toilet waste to be flushed out the back. So we're excited to see what the context for applying that in the US can be. Now, there's a lot of challenges around urine diverting toilet installation in the US, especially around plumbing certification, because all of these toilets were designed in Europe, and so it varies state to state what states will require in terms of where you can install these toilets. So we're working on trying to find some more US certified toilets, but more on that in the coming years, we hope. And then there are also some urine only fixture options. So if you already have a toilet in your house that you like and you don't want to replace it, you can just add a second toilet, maybe in a second bathroom, that just collects the urine and goes to a tank in your basement. So that's a nice option as well. So there's the Cinderella urinal, which originally was designed to accompany the Cinderella incinerating toilet because, you know, you don't want liquids in an incinerating toilet. So it makes them a lot easier to use if you separate the liquids. And then the Peapod is a device that's under development by our colleagues in Cape Cod. That's essentially a residential urinal that that folds up to be flush with your wall and then can unfold to be peed into. So for folks who collect urine in their homes and then also to pump out the urine depot, we go around periodically and pump out all of the urine. You can see Arthur pumping out a urine donor's house here, just with a fixture attached to the outside of their home, kind of the inverse of getting your oil delivered. You can get your nutrients lifted away. Yes, I'll just seeing a couple questions in the chat. I'll share this recording with you all after the webinar. And yeah, for apartment buildings, generally, we recommend using the portable urine collector because, you know, the other options require some significant infrastructural change. But we are in talks with some new apartment or housing development complexes to explore how the whole building could be designed to be built with urine diversion and then a processing system in the basement. I'll show you a little picture of that when we talk about Brightwater tools in a bit. But so for transport, essentially our truck is like any other truck, except that it has this vacuum pump retrofitted onto it. So we can easily pump urine onto and off of large tanks that we store in the back of it. So once we collect all of the urine from homes and businesses, we have installations in a brewery and a library and a local educational farm. We bring all of that urine back to our research center where we then treat it. So because we're operating at a community scale, we are certified by the state of Vermont to produce what they call a Class A exceptional quality biosolid, which they call us a biosolid because there isn't a separate legal category for urine, but they recognize that urine is a very different substance than biosolids. But to do this, we use a urine pasteurizer that our spin-off company Brightwater Tools has designed, which heats the urine to 80 degrees Celsius for a minute and a half through a continual flow heat transfer system. So it's very energy efficient. It uses about the same amount of energy as one light bulb. And it allows the hot urine that's leaving the pasteurizer to transfer its heat to the colder urine that's entering. So once we've treated the urine, then we bring it to local farms to fertilize. We've partnered with a lot of different farms in the community over the past few years, especially around various agricultural research projects to explore how we can streamline urine fertilization into their agricultural methods and how we can maximize the efficiency and efficacy of urine as a fertilizer and prevent the nitrogen loss, especially, has been a big research focus of ours. So these are some of our farm partners that we've worked with over the years. Our earliest farm partners were hay farmers, which was nice from a social acceptance standpoint to have an added step of the cow eating the grass and then the human eating the cow product rather than directly consuming a urine fertilized produce. But we have also fertilized sweet corn and figs and hemp and cut flowers and all sorts of other things. And we've also done some social research recently around consumer perspectives on urine fertilized produce, which has been really informative as well to opening up our farm partnerships beyond just hay. But one of our earliest research projects was focused on hay yield trials, where we essentially just compared urine fertilizer to synthetic fertilizer and found that when applied at the same nitrogen loading rate, they had the same impact on increasing the hay yield. So very encouraging and validating to see. And since then, a number of studies have been done around the world looking at yield effects of urine fertilization on a wide variety of different crops. And some of those are compiled in an upcoming farm guide to urine fertilization that we're going to be publishing later this month. So here's some pictures of our corn farm partnership. One of the nice things about this research project we did with the sweet corn farmer was we worked with him to retrofit his tractor so that as he's going through and cultivating his corn already, it can just be applying the urine fertilizer at the same time. So it's not requiring an additional pass through his farm field. And so that as the urine is applied, it's immediately being covered over with soil, which is important to help prevent the ammonia volatilization. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. One thing we've been trialing at our research center is this, what I call our anthrovermiponic system, which is essentially a hydroponics mural that combines worm castings or worm tea with human urine, which turn out to make kind of a match made in heaven for the nutrient composition that a hydroponic system would need. So we've been growing a lot of lettuce in the system, primarily leafy greens, and providing it to the local food bank and also eating it ourselves as staff. And this whole system was designed by an organization based in California called the Dark Nectar Cooperative, which is really focused on increasing access to growing food to people without access to land necessarily. So agricultural systems without extraction and without exploitation. So we're really interested in this model, especially as we think about urban agriculture, and where a lot of our urine fertilizer reserves are in the US is in cities. So finding a way for them to be used locally in cities without having to be transported so far is very intriguing. But we do have some further research questions around the life cycle impact of systems like this in terms of their energy usage that we're curious to explore more. So we're now actively working to support other communities in adopting this community scale urine recycling model. We've produced a guide that details everything that we've done to set up our program here in Brattleboro. And the main community we've been working with lately is folks in Cape Cod, where they have huge nutrient pollution problems, both in the coastal areas and in their ponds. So specifically, we've been working with the town of Falmouth, who has voted to fund a planning project to develop a pilot study on urine diversion to be part of their watershed management plan for nutrient pollution prevention. So we've been collaborating a lot with the Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center, which now has one of those pasteurizers I showed earlier, and also the Green Center, who's been helping disseminate these urine collection kits to folks in Cape Cod. And we're also interested in supporting more folks throughout Vermont in getting on-site resource recovery systems going, especially as we've seen the impacts of flooding and climate change on our conventional wastewater systems. We're hearing a rising cry for alternatives that can be less vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And we think source separation can be a piece in the puzzle, but there's a lot else to figure out in terms of what could be a whole system solution for these communities. But another component of that is in Vermont and in other states that are climate receiving states, where climate migrants or folks from other places in the US are moving, communities are trying to plan how we can house more people without having a negative impact on the environment and the habitat surrounding the communities. So this is what we call smart growth, where we're trying to have compact village settlements where people have access to resources and communities and aren't producing rural sprawl. But a huge stumbling block in creating this smart growth development pattern is having the space for the wastewater treatment systems. And especially in small villages where you don't have a huge wastewater treatment system or sewer system set up already, not having the space for adding a bunch of extra septic systems is really a challenge for communities that are trying to plan in this way. So thinking about the ways in which tools like compost toilets and gray water recycling and urine recycling could come together to allow for alternatives is something we're really interested in, but there's a lot of work to do around the policy and technical components fitting together for that. So this is a little more on our thinking on that line of thought. Then briefly just about what Brave Water Tools is working on the building scale of urine recycling. Their vision, like Vuna that I was describing earlier, is to have a basement treatment package that could collect all of the toilet waste from a building, potentially even all of the black water, so combining the all of the toilet wastes and processing it and then concentrating it. And so this is a brief overview of what their treatment train looks like. It includes the pasteurizer that I showed earlier, and then also a freeze concentrator is really the key component of their treatment package, which is a way to remove a lot of the water from urine so that it can be a lot more efficient to transport volume-wise, especially when you're trying to scale up urine recycling. That becomes really important as well. So essentially the way the freeze concentrator works is it iteratively freezes and thaws the urine so that when urine freezes, the water separates out as ice, and then the more concentrated nutrient-rich urine can run off. And then that remaining ice water can be melted and used for some kind of on-site gray water recycling or non-potable reuse. And then that high strength urine that's run off can be frozen again and reconcentrated several times until you have a very nutrient concentrated fertilizer product. So now to shift gears and talk more about how you can do this in your own backyard without a bunch of additional technologies, I'll share a little bit about what home garden scale urine recycling can look like. And we have a guide on our website called Here in My Garden that details a lot of this information as well. So the first thing to know when you want to start Peecycling in your own backyard is the actual nutrient content of urine. So we've done nutrient analysis on our community collected urine and gotten the NPK, or the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium levels, which is 0.6, 0.1, 0.2. So you really want to think of urine fertilizer as primarily a nitrogen fertilizer, but it does have a wide range of other microconstituents in it as well. So it is even more of a complete fertilizer than what you might buy at the store, because our bodies naturally need these nutrients, as do plants, and so our bodies naturally excrete them, which is great for growing plants who might need them as well. So here's that property I've been talking about a little bit already, which is the propensity of urine to lose its nitrogen value to the air through a process called ammonia volatilization. So if you kind of don't remember anything else about the process for urine fertilization, this is really the key property to know about, which is it's really important to prevent the exposure of urine to air. So when you're collecting your urine, you want to make sure that once your urine is collected, it's stored in an airtight container. And then when you're applying the urine to your garden, you want to make sure that you're minimizing the amount of time that it's being sprayed in the air or exposed to the air. So I'll share a couple tips on that in the next few slides. So again, for collection methods at home, we have this Peecycling kit, which is now available on Etsy, or we have it available at our research center here if you're local. And then there's this Toilets for People Peetoilet, which is available on their website. But you can also use a wide range of DIY collection methods. We have a community science survey where we hear from folks how they've been collecting urine to use in their gardens. And from that survey, wide mouth laundry detergent bottles and kitty litter containers have both been very common things people have been using. You can also do something like have a luggable loo or bucket container that's filled with biochar, and then pee into that until the biochar is soaked, and then use that as a soil amendment is something we've heard folks doing in our science survey as well. And just a fun fact to know as you're collecting at home is that every 5 gallons of urine that you collect conserves an average of 100 gallons of water if you were to flush all of that urine in a standard flush toilet. So then the next step for using urine in your home garden to think about is whether or not you want to sanitize the urine. So as I mentioned earlier, we sanitize all of the urine we collect in our community program. But if you're using urine at home, urine is actually pathogen free and safe to use without needing to sanitize. And the World Health Organization has published guidelines on this. Essentially, the main thing you want to keep in mind is it's recommended to wait at least 1 month or 30 days after you fertilize before you're going to harvest any crops that you'll eat raw, so a lettuce or something like that. But other than that, it's totally safe to just put the urine straight into your garden. But if you're fertilizing a public context, like a community garden perhaps is kind of a gray area, or a farm, or if you're collecting urine from a wider group of individuals than lives in your household, it is recommended to sanitize the urine because there could be some contamination, or in our program, because we use these urine diverting toilets, there's some potential for fecal contamination. So that's another reason to sanitize. So if you want to sanitize at home, you can just store your urine in an airtight container for about 6 months at room temperature. And this will naturally raise the pH in the urine high enough that it will kill any potential pathogens that could be in there and make it safe to use. So there's 3 principles we like to think of in terms of fertilizer usage that applies to any fertilizer, but I'll talk through it specifically regarding to urine fertilizer, which is right amount, right time, and right place. So for right amount, you already know the nutrient content of the urine with our urine analysis, and then you want to match make that with your plant's nutrient needs and your soil nutrient content already. So we generally recommend for plants applying urine to plants that have high nitrogen needs. So brassicas, leafy greens, tomatoes, really anything with high nitrogen needs is a great recipient for urine fertilizer. And Cornell University has a really great guide to the nitrogen needs of a wide variety of commonly grown garden vegetables. And that guide is linked in our home garden guide. So if you want to learn more about specifically the nitrogen needs of different plants, that's a great resource to check out. And then for understanding your soil nutrient content, often local state extension services offer a service of providing soil tests or doing soil testing for you. So you can collect a soil sample and send it to them, and they can let you know what nutrients it may be high or deficient in, and that can help you inform how much urine to apply as well. But if you don't want to do all of that calculating and matchmaking, you can also apply based on the observation method, which is just giving your plants more nitrogen when they seem like they're growing slower, or if they're showing signs of nitrogen deficiency. And a common sign of nitrogen deficiency in plants is just having yellow or pale green leaves in their undergrowth, especially. We've also calculated this very rough rule of thumb that for a 10-foot by 10-foot garden or 100-square-foot garden, you want to be applying somewhere around 3.5 to 5.5 gallons of urine over the full growing cycle. So divide that by however many times you'll be applying the urine. And this is just a good way to keep in mind whether you're, just to ballpark whether you're applying potentially too much or too little for an average vegetable garden. So it's really not that much urine that a home garden needs in terms of how much urine you create every day. It's kind of interesting how the economies of scale work out around this, where a farm, to fertilize an acre on a farm, you need 1,000 gallons of urine. So farms often have way less urine than they want. And we have consistently greater demand from local farm partners for urine than we can supply. But in your garden, you might quickly find that you're collecting far more urine than you can use in your garden in a year. So then to think about when to apply the urine, again, you want to apply when the plants have the greatest nitrogen need. So that's generally older than a seedling, but before they're fruiting or flowering, because nitrogen stimulates more leafy green shooty growth. And so you wouldn't want to fertilize your plant when it's trying to set out flowers, because it would redirect its energy into growing more leaves and shoots. And generally, we recommend applying the urine in several small applications rather than one large one, so that you're giving the plants the nutrients as they're needing them, because urine fertilizer is a very quick acting fertilizer. So you want to apply it in several iterations. And then again, at least 30 days before harvest for crops that you're going to eat raw per those World Health Organization guidelines. And there are some caveats to this. You can apply, when you're transplanting your seedling into your garden, you can apply a small amount of urine around the seedling or mix it into the compost that you're going to be transplanting it with, as a good way to give it a little boost to get going. And that's worked out great as well. So then for right place, generally you want to apply it to the soil and not the plant, though there are some folks who've been interested in foliar feeding with urine. It's a little bit more of a can of worms to get into, and there's a potential that you could burn your plant if you don't quite do it properly. But generally, if you apply the urine to the soil about 4 inches away from the base of the plant to avoid burning the plant with too much nitrogen, and then you want to find a way to incorporate that urine into the soil as quickly as possible, again, to prevent that ammonia volatilization from happening. So one way to do this is to just dilute the urine beforehand. Dilution is really more of an art than a science, and there's a wide range of dilution ratios we've seen people using. It really depends on how dry your garden is and how many nutrients you're trying to give your plants. But 3 parts or 5 parts water to urine ratio, 3 to 1 or 5 to 1 seems to be the most common. So that's a good rule of thumb to get started with. Or you can just irrigate your garden after you apply the urine. Or what we do with a lot of our farm partners is we apply the urine just before the rain, so the rain can naturally integrate that urine into the soil. Another method is you can bury the urine into the soil. So if you make a little hole next to your plant, or a ring around your plant, or a furrow down the center of a row of plants, and apply the urine into that shallow hole and then bury it with soil. That's another method. And that's what our corn farm partner was doing with his tractor when he was cultivating the corn in that earlier slide. So there's a few additional methods that we've been interested in exploring for urine fertilization as well. One that we just completed the second part of a 2-part research project into is drip fertigation. So if you have a drip irrigation system already set up, this is a great way to add in urine fertilizer into your garden without having to do a ton of extra work, and also while keeping the urine in this totally enclosed system. So it's really great for preventing that ammonia volatilization as well. And it provides the fertilizer in steady, slow drips just as the plants are needing them. So the timing works out really greatly with this method also. If you're interested in learning more about our research on this question, we have a whole research report from our first half of the study up on our publications page on our website, looking into using urine with different kinds of what's the word I'm looking for? Alternating, adding in urine and water versus combining them together, and some other factors that we were looking into as well. And then we often hear from folks that they just will go out and pee straight into their compost pile, which can be a really great way to use the nutrients from your urine, but really depends on the carbon content of your compost pile. So if you have a very green compost pile already with a lot of high nitrogen-rich compost in it, like food scraps or other green plant material, then you can kind of think of it like a full sponge where it already has a lot of nutrients in it and it can't really retain the nutrients from the urine. And so those nutrients will run off and not be saved in your compost. But if you have a very high carbon content compost pile that has a lot of straw or dead leaves or other dry dead plant material, then it's a great recipient for a urine fertilizer. And the urine can actually accelerate the composting process. We have some partners over in the Adirondacks at Compost for Good is their organization, and they've been doing some trials of in-vessel composting, I believe with wood pellets and urine, and they've been having great effects of the urine accelerating the compost process and producing a really nutrient-rich compost soil amendment. And then, as I was mentioning earlier, for folks who use this in their collection method, you can also combine urine and biochar. So if you're not familiar with biochar, this is a carbon-rich soil amendment that's produced through burning organic matter with low oxygen. And it is really great because it has a very large surface area, so it can have a lot of microbes that live on it, and it can also retain nutrients really well. So if you soak the biochar with the urine, the biochar can hold on to those nutrients for a lot longer and keep them available in the soil for a longer amount of time, because urine is a very fast-acting fertilizer amendment. Combining it with the biochar allows it to be available for longer and has the carbon sequestering benefits of returning the biochar to the soil. So we're actually looking into this as part of that soil health research study that I was describing earlier, where we're combining urine with a few different kinds of biochar and compost and other soil amendments to look at how these different recipes shake out in the long term for the soil health effects. So it recommended additional step to your home gardening practice that I like to encourage folks to do is to take our community science survey, which you can find at tinyurl.com/yearinmygarden 2024. I'll also share a link to you all in a follow-up from this email to this as well. And this is really a great way to share what you've been doing with the rest of the global Peecycling community. We inform a lot of our education based on what home gardeners are telling us, because while there's a lot of agricultural research at the larger scale of how to use urine fertilizer, there's not as much on specific practices for the home garden scale. So this is a really important way for us to learn both about what people are practically doing and also about their social and emotional and personal relationships with Peecycling and how it's connecting into this larger movement. And this year we've added a couple optional add-ons if these are helpful to you. One is this log sheet that you can download and print to help you track your urine fertilization throughout the growing season and track your observations. And that can be a helpful thing to look back on the following year and see what you learned about using urine fertilizer and what you may want to change. And we recommend folks sharing your completed log sheet with us at the end of the season so we can also learn from what you've been learning. And we have a story collector if you want to share more narratively what your journey with the concept of home nutrient cycling has been. We have an option to do that as well. So in our core community science survey, just a few spotlights of some questions that or some responses we've received from that. One interesting thing that we've learned that we only know anecdotally from the survey, but a lot of folks do seem to be reporting that urine fertilization has this interesting side benefit of reducing insect predation or other predator presence in their gardens. So folks have been saying that urine fertilizing has caused less insect damage on certain plants, and also that urine fertilization has deterred rodents like rats or groundhogs from coming into their garden. And then there's a bucket of people who use urine specifically as a pest deterrent strategy. So they'll pour a thick perimeter of urine around their garden as a way to keep deer or other animals from entering their garden as well. So that's been really interesting to learn. One of our other questions is about how much folks talk with others about their practice of urine fertilization. And it really ranges from folks who do it in secrecy, like for instance, someone who lives in a homeowners association who only goes out and urine fertilizes at night with a watering can, to folks on the far other end of the spectrum who will eagerly talk about their secret ingredient in their garden and give bathroom tours of how they're collecting and are kind of Peecycling ambassadors. And I think there's a lot of folks in the middle range who've been increasingly emboldened as more projects are coming online across the country and around the world of people doing Peecycling at larger scales, and also as the national news media is picking up on this a bit more, especially with the New York Times article that came out a couple of years ago and a CBS video piece that came out recently. I think it's been emboldening people to talk more about this thing that they had been doing in secrecy with others. So if you do live in our area, which I don't think either of you do, you can donate urine in Vermont. We're always seeking new urine donors to join our program. So here's information about that. If you know folks in our region, put them in touch with me. And we also offer these installations for local homes and businesses. And then, as I mentioned, our Peecycling kit is available on Etsy. We also have a DIY instructional video for how to make a simplified version of this yourself at home. And the nice thing about the Etsy version of this is it comes with a little spout that fits onto the opening of the container, so you can easily transfer it into a watering can or something without a bunch of spilling. And then, as I mentioned, our annual Rich Earth Summit is coming up this November 12th through 14th. And this is going to be our 10th annual global gathering for urine reclamation. And it brings together researchers and practitioners from around the world to share what they've been working on this topic. And it's really exciting time to learn about the state of the field every year. So we'd love to have you join us at that as well. And with that, I'll bring us back and would love to hear your questions and your own experiences with urine fertilization.